Hey guys, what's going on? I know I haven't made a video in over a year or two. A lot of life events had happened, and I'll talk about that someday. Probably in another video here. Some things that were pretty hard, and I think maybe it might help inspire some guys. Anyway, what I was going to talk about today is about masturbation and porn. It seems like that's a huge issue for a lot of guys. And one of the tips I was going to give is, I always hate these clickbaity titles of one simple trick and it's a 10-minute long video. So I'm going to tell you the trick right now, and you can watch the rest of the video for why it works. But a trick to help you big time is simply, instead of thinking like, oh, I need to make 30 days or I need to make 90 days, just keep track of how often you do it. And what I mean by that is just write it down, on a calendar, put a little mark, or make an Excel spreadsheet or something. And then that trick actually helps you reduce it by huge amounts of numbers. So I'm going to talk more about that stuff today. So as you see, I'm up in the woods here. I'm not here much anymore. I live down in a city and it really sucks. And when I come back up in the woods here, I realize how much I miss it, and kind of how much more natural it is to be in the woods. Like, I just feel my mental clarity coming back, my perspective. Because when you're in a city, it's really weird. You always get exposed to all these high stress, well, not necessarily high stress, but a bunch of small stressors that start to add up. You always got to be aware of traffic, who's merging. You always got the sound of traffic. You always got the sound of sirens, of horns. You're walking down the street, you're always worried about these people. You're worried about night, all these kind of things. Whereas when you're in the woods, there's nothing to necessarily be afraid of. So anyway, back to the subject of this video. One thing I want to make clear is, so the nofap movement has been gaining huge amounts of popularity lately. It's been really crazy seeing how much it's changed, because I remember when the movement first started, very early on, I'd say probably like 2012-ish, I don't remember, but early days. And it was a lot more like, it was kind of like the MGTOW, the MGTOW movement, whereas a lot of it was like self-improvement, guys helping each other, and it was just this one aspect, kind of like how the MGTOW movement was about guys that had been screwed by women and then were trying to better themselves. The MGTOW movement, I don't follow it much anymore, but I think it's kind of died. It got really, really toxic, and I kind of hate that term because it's kind of been appropriated. But a lot of this MGTOW sites got shut down. The nofap movement's got pretty crazy too. It's become quasi-religious, where unless you accept this ultra doctrine, you're not even considered like a real one. My dog's in the back here. I haven't seen her in a while, so throwing some toys for her. But so the big nofap thing is, and I want to be clear about that, in my mind, porn is the ultimate evil here. And ideally, you want to not be masturbating as well. But if you have to choose one or the other, it's so, well, I mean, that sounds a little weird because you're obviously going to be masturbating with porn, but it's so much better to cut porn out and masturbate more than to masturbate sometimes but always have it with porn. There's actually a fair amount of, there's some studies out there about hyper arousal, and I think the term's called like hyperstimulants. And to our brains, especially like the part of our brain that deals with sex, it's kind of, you hear the term like lizard brain. It's more of like a older instinctual part of our brain. And it's that whenever we see this really hot girl, it's like, oh, we got to impregnate her. That's, as guys, that's what we want to do. And then so back way in like ancestral history, you'd probably be cruising through the savannas or forests or whatever. And then if you see a really hot girl, suddenly it's on, and you need to like impregnate her so that she can produce a kid. These days, society is a lot more different. To some extent, it's more stable, although, that's up for debate given the way society is now. But what happens is when you start looking at porn, it triggers these hyperstimulants where your brain thinks like, oh, hot girl here, oh, hot girl here, hot girl here. And then especially given the fact that porn is multifaceted in its nefariousness. It's just bad enough looking at like a naked video of some girl and then that being a hyperstimulant. But the problem is, especially with like the internet, is you have a tab and a tab and a tab. You know, this girl does this girl does this, two girls do this. And then it's like the entire time you're amped up because you're touching yourself and you're just waiting for the one best video to finish. And then so it's like this really weird thing where not only you're hyperstimulated, it's, oh, this girl's got the nice ass, this girl's got a nice rack. And then you're like, you want more and more and more. Whereas your ancestral brain would have been just happy for that one girl. But now it's like you're almost like this king or god where you have a selection of all these women. And the problem with that is that when you inevitably orgasm, it tells your brain that the rest of your life is so ideal to keep doing what you're doing. So it makes you really complacent. I mean, pretty much any guy that really kind of starts to dig into his mind and his feelings knows that after he comes, you lose all sense of drive, you lose sense of will. You may be like short-term content, but usually a lot of guys feel like regret and like, oh man, what was I thinking? But so now to go back to the main tip here is the nofap movement is so crazy where it's like, oh, you got to go 90 days straight. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but what happens is you get these guys that'll be like, yeah, I went 90 days, I went 200 days, no fap, and then I touched myself in the shower, and then it'll be like all these people, oh, you're a loser, you're addicted, you're this and you're that. And it's like, well, wait a sec. This guy just went 90 days. He just went 200 days. I'd say that's a victory. And so my original tip of keeping track of how long between or how often you do it is this is where it's going to make a big difference. Because with nofap, the base movement as it's really popularized right now is you have to go 90 days. And if you don't go 90 days, you're a loser and you're addicted and you're doomed and all this and that. And then the problem is it really encourages relapsing. So it's like, say you make 30 days, you make 50 days, and your horniness is just so extreme you can't take it anymore. And then so you jack off to some porn. Now the next day you're like, oh fuck, well, I'm still pretty horny and 50 days was a long time, so I might as well get it out of my system. So then you start doing it again and again. And then so you're already in this hole, so you might as well stay there. And that's the real, and that right there is the real key of the problem of this all or nothing approach that the nofap movement kind of espouses, is because once you're down there, you get hit with, real effects. Like, I think it's called the chaser effect, where it's like you get this high once, and then now you're feeling kind of low from the natural withdrawals. And so you might as well do it again to feel that other high. And then so you get stuck down in this abyss, and then eventually, after a week or whatever, it's like, okay, I'm gonna try. You go a week, you go 2, you go a month. And then inevitably it's like, oh, F. You touch yourself again, you jack off, boom, you're back down. And then it's this really dangerous cycle of binging, abstaining, binging and abstaining. What in contrast though is let's say an average guy thinks he's got a problem and he masturbates like once a day or twice a day every day for a month. So we'll call it twice a day for a month. So that's 60. If he starts changing it where every time he does it, he tries to resist, but he writes down on a calendar or a notepad or an Excel sheet or something, Monday, April 1st, one time, Tuesday, April 2nd, one time. What happens is at the end of the month, ideally, that number should be less than his previous, which was 60. So let's say he reduced it down to 45. Well, he's actually made progress. The nofap movement would say that he's still a loser and he should go kill himself and all these kind of things. But now we get into the next month, and then now it's in May. Now he maybe he does it once a day. So at the end of the month, he's down to 30. And then, so the issue, the key difference here is he's still making progress, because especially something like sex is such a very strong addiction, and it's kind of like a need. And I use that term loosely, obviously, but if this was an easy addiction to break or an easy thing to abstain from, the entire movement wouldn't exist, porn largely wouldn't exist, and those sorts of things. So back to what I was talking about, where essentially if you keep reducing your total number here, eventually you're going to get to the point where it's like, say you go a week or 2 weeks without doing it, and then you get really horny and you know you probably shouldn't, but you do it anyway. Okay, you put your little tally mark down, you feel the regret, you feel the loss of energy, the loss of drive, but you're good to go now. So now you go another week, another 2 weeks, and then you do it again. And so now you're at the end of the month and you've only done it twice. Now, the nofap movement would say you're still a loser, reset your counter, all these kind of things. But it's like, wait a sec, I've only done it twice this entire month when I used to do it 60 times a month. That's actually pretty huge progress. And then you start getting into the realm of whether or not masturbation is even normal at all, and whether like a day is okay, a week's okay, whatever. That's a little beyond the scope of this video, but the key I want to stress is improving your numbers in a way that it brings you down. Because what's so bad about the entire movement is that it's this, and ironically, it's always focused on the masturbation. Very rarely is it truly focused on the porn. I mean, that's always kind of like an underlying current, but the key thing here is you need to cut out the porn first. And if that means increasing how many times you're jacking off just with your imagination to cut out porn, that's completely fine. And I challenge a lot of you guys, if you're struggling with this, to cut out the porn, but don't limit yourself to masturbation. And you're gonna be surprised by a couple things. One is that you may not be able to get off without porn. Two is that you'll get off and you'll still feel this desire. And both of those things are gonna show you how deeply rooted the porn addiction is. And so that's kind of a key thing I would challenge you guys with, is try to actually separate in your mind, is this horniness caused because, oh, you know, you saw this hot girl at the gym and you want to imagine her, or is it that you actually are like addicted to the porn process of sitting in the chair, clicking on tabs, touching yourself? And that second part seems like that might not be the case, but I think if you actually start digging into it, you'll find out that that's probably the vast case for majority of men. I remember reading a stat in a couple different places that something like 80 to 90% of men struggle with porn, and I actually wouldn't be surprised if it's higher, because unless you were raised in like extremely religious like community or something and like swallowed it like hook, line, and sinker, inevitably you're gonna have your smartphone, your computer, whatever, you see a hot girl and, oh, what's this porn stuff all about, and suddenly it's on and you're addicted. But so 90% of guys are addicted to porn. And think about this too. Does the government or society or whoever you want to blame give you anything good for free? If something like this is so addicting and they're giving it to you for free, you need to think long and hard about why it's out there. So I'm going to wrap up this video, guys. I'm going to start talking more about getting back into like the monk lifestyle and those kind of things. But yeah, just the key takeaways from this video is cut out porn at all costs, even if that means like touching yourself more, at least short term. And the other key thing is actually keep track. And instead of saying like, oh, I need to go 30 days, why don't you just say, okay, last month I did it 45 times. My goal this time is 30. And then after that month, my next goal is 15. And just kind of like wean yourself off of it. And then that way too, you don't get the whole guilt and stuck in this hole where it's like, oh, F, man, I'm already down here, might as well keep going. But if you have to keep track of it, there's actually an impetus where you're already in this hole to say, well, you know, if I do it again, that's going to put another tally on. Let me just see if I can go a couple more days. And then that couple more days, suddenly your numbers are down big time. So anyway, guys, hope you're doing good out there. Leave any comments. I will try to respond to comments, and hope you have a good one. Let me know if you want me to do any videos about anything. I'm just going to start doing more videos about modern men's struggles in this society that seems like it's very hard to be a man anymore. All right, have a good one, guys. See ya.